You ever wake up to the gut-wrenching roar of your own truck louder than a jet engine and realize someone has gutted it in the dead of night? That's the sound of your trust in humanity being sawed in half. But if you think I just called the cops and waited, you don't know me, because when those two idiots stole my catalytic converters, they didn't just steal from me, they handed me the perfect blueprint for their own destruction. Before I take you through the night, I turned a pair of cocky thieves into a public spectacle. Hit that like button and subscribe. You're about to hear how sweet justice can be when you take it into your own hands. I've always been an early riser, but nothing prepared me for the sound that shook me awake at 2:45 on a Monday morning. My old Chevy roared like a wounded beast the moment I turned the ignition. The sound was so violent it rattled the windows and set the neighborhood dogs barking like sirens. For a second, I thought the muffler had fallen clean off, or maybe a backfire had blown out the exhaust. But then that acrid metallic smell, hot, sharp, like burnt coins, slid through the cab. My gut told me something worse had happened. I jumped out and crouched by the truck, flashlight slicing the cold pre-dawn air. The pavement was slick with dew, and there it was, two perfect gaps in the undercarriage where my catalytic converters should have been. Fresh saw marks gleamed like silver scars. Whoever did it knew exactly what they were after, and they'd done it fast. My chest tightened with a mix of fury and disbelief. I'd heard of catalytic thefts hitting other folks in town, but it never crossed my mind they'd target me until the evidence stared back like a taunt. Neighbors peeked through blinds as I cursed under my breath, my voice carrying in the quiet street. Unbelievable, I muttered, heart hammering. I thought of the cost, hundreds, maybe thousands, and the days I'd be without my truck. It wasn't just money. That truck was my livelihood. Every dent in the bed told a story. Every tool in the back seat earned me my living, and some punks had crawled beneath it and stripped it like a carcass while I slept less than 20 feet away. I paced the driveway, mind racing. Call the police. Sure, I could file a report, but everyone knew how that went. Paperwork, maybe a shrug, and my parts long gone to some scrapyard before sunrise. My jaw clenched. I wanted names, faces, someone to hold accountable. The thought of them laughing, cashing in on my converters while I stood there like a fool lit, burned hotter than any torch they'd used to cut through my exhaust. Then, as if fate wasn't done rubbing salt in the wound, a neighbor across the street waved me over. Old Mrs. Keegan, robe tied tight, pointed toward her porch camera. You might want to see this, she whispered. We huddled over her phone screen, the glow lighting our breath in the chilly air. And there they were, two lanky kids, maybe late teens or early 20s. Their hoodies pulled low but not enough to hide their faces when they glanced at each other and laughed. My blood boiled. I knew those faces. Everyone in the neighborhood did. They were local trouble kids who thought they were untouchable. They spent their days hanging around the fried chicken shack on 5th, blasting music from a rattling old police Crown Vic, the kind of car you'd expect in a bad TV cop show. People joked the car was held together with duct tape and arrogance. No plates, no working and from the way it rattled when their bass hit, I doubted the thing even had a legal exhaust system. I felt a dark smile tug at my lips. Maybe they thought they were smart, but they'd just given me the rope to hang them with. Part 1 continues with the narrator's growing obsession, the first encounters with the thieves at the chicken shack, and the creeping realization that simple police action won't satisfy him. He begins quietly gathering into learning their habits, spotting their car parked illegally, and planning a move that will hurt far worse than any fine. He calls in a friend in code enforcement, setting the stage for a plan that's more than payback, it's poetic justice. Sleep became an occasional visitor, instead of a nightly guarantee. Every creak of the house at night yanked me awake, my mind replaying the metallic screech of saw blades on steel. I'd lie there in the dark staring at the ceiling, jaw locked, wondering how many other neighbors were being hit while the thieves laughed over greasy chicken wings. It wasn't only the loss of the converters anymore. It was the raw humiliation of being played for a fool right under my own nose. Morning after morning, I drove my loaner car past that same fried chicken shack, the one place in town where the smell of deep-fried batter drifted across the street like a permanent cloud, and every time, without fail, the battered black Crown Vic squatted crooked in the lot. Its paint was dull, pocked with rust bubbles like a teenager's bad skin, and the bass from their cheap sound system thumped so hard the windows buzzed. They didn't even try to hide. I'd gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. A dozen scenarios flashing in my head. Slash their tires, call the police right then. But each idea fizzled before it caught flame. Slashing tires would just get me arrested. Calling the cops, well, I'd already been down that road before in this town. The paperwork would outlast their next theft, and they'd be back out the next day. Grinning, my friend Jake, who worked in code enforcement, finally picked up on the dark cloud hanging over me. "Man, you're chewing nails," he said over coffee one afternoon. "Either you've quit sleeping, or someone owes you a lot of money." I told him the story from start to finish. The missing converters, the camera footage, the brazen daylight lounging. He listened without interrupting. The kind of silence that meant gears were turning. When I finished, he leaned back and whistled low. "I know those kids. Cars, a nightmare. No plates, no registration. Whole thing's basically a rolling violation." He paused, a slow grin spreading. "You could call the cops, sure, but what if you let me pass along a little information? There is a way to do this by the book and still make it sting." My heart kicked up a notch. "By the book?" I asked, suspicious and intrigued all at once. Jake nodded. "Yeah, nuisance tow, city ordinance, cars, not street legal. If it's parked on a public street, we can have it hauled off, no questions asked. Police will back it because it's a hazard." He sipped his coffee like he'd just offered me a slice of pie. For a moment, I imagined it. The Crown Vic dangling from a tow truck's hook like a captured beast. The two thieves scrambling to figure out where their precious ride had vanished. The thought warmed me like a shot of whiskey. But then reality tugged at my sleeve. And what if they just pick it up, pay the fine, and drive it again? Jake shrugged. "That heap hasn't been registered in years. Fines and back fees will be thousands. Odds are whoever sold it to them never had the title straight. Without that, they're dead in the water. We tow it. It goes to impound. From there, well, let's just say the junkyard makes quick work of orphans like that." I should have felt triumphant. But instead, I felt the first twinge of hesitation. Was I really ready to drop the hammer? I paced my living room that night, weighing the scales. They'd stolen from me, sure, but was I crossing a line? Then I remembered the laughter caught on Mrs. Keegan's camera. The way one of them looked right at the lens, like he knew nobody would touch him. The hesitation melted like frost in the sun. The next evening, I parked across from the chicken shack. Windows cracked, the smell of fryer grease drifting through. The Crown Vic sat there like a black tumor in the fading light, bass rattling so loud my dashboard buzzed. The two of them leaned against the hood, paper cups in hand, heads bobbing like the world owed them a living. I memorized every detail: the torn sleeves of one kid's hoodie, the faded skull sticker on the back bumper. Evidence burned itself into my mind, fuel for the fire. Jake and I started laying groundwork. He passed the tip quietly to the local police that a certain unregistered car was being used for nuisance activity. The officers knew the story. This wasn't the first time those kids had popped up on their radar. We agreed on one thing: we had to catch the car parked on a public street. Private property would complicate the tow, and I didn't want a single loophole giving them a chance to wriggle free. Waiting was torture. Days stretched like taut wire, every hour tightening the coil inside me. Each night I drove the neighborhood circuit, scanning for that ugly black silhouette. I drank more coffee than I had in years, the bitterness coating my tongue like armor. The empty hum of the loaner car mocked me. Every rattle from its old suspension reminded me of what they'd taken, and how icily they might strike again. Finally, just after midnight on a Thursday, luck or maybe justice stepped in. I spotted the Crown Vic idling alone on a quiet street a few blocks from the shack. Streetlights flickered overhead, casting long shadows that made the car look even more sinister. No kids in sight. My pulse thudded so hard I could feel it in my fingertips. This was it. I pulled to the curb and called Jake, my voice low and steady. "It's sitting on Oakwood. No one inside." He didn't waste a second. "Stay put. I'll call it in. Don't get close." I hung up and sat in the dark, watching condensation form on my windshield as the seconds stretched into eternity. Headlights finally cut through the night. A tow truck, amber lights flashing like a quiet celebration. The driver hopped out, gave me a knowing nod, and began the slow ballet of chains and hooks. The sound of the winch echoed down the empty street, metallic and final. When the Crown Vic lifted off its tires, I felt a rush of vindication that made my chest swell. The driver hauled it away, toward the police station, where officers ran the VIN. Just as Jake predicted, the registration had been dead for over a decade, the listed owner long gone. The kids had been driving a ghost car, without a title. It was nothing but a heap of steel waiting to be claimed by the junkyard. Even with that small victory, the next hour stretched like another test. Somewhere out there, the the two thieves were waking to find their precious ride missing. I imagined them tearing through their contacts, accusing friends, hunting for answers. It wasn't enough yet. I wanted them to feel that sinking dread, the slow realization that this wasn't a prank. They were trapped by their own arrogance. Later, that morning I drove past the chicken shack. They weren't there. No Crown Vic, no pounding bass. The parking lot seemed strangely quiet, the air heavier without their noise. For the first time in weeks, I felt a calm settle in, but deep down I knew this was just the middle of the storm, not the end. They wouldn't take this lying down. Sure enough, by that afternoon, rumors swirled through town. A couple of frantic kids were asking anyone who'd listen if they'd seen their car. Some said they looked ready to fight, others said they looked ready to cry. The image of their panic played in my mind like a private film reel. I'd be lying if I said I didn't enjoy every frame. The following evening, Jake called with an update. They came by the station, he said, a chuckle in his voice. Tried to report it stolen. Officers explained it wasn't registered, belonged to someone else, and was headed for a certificate of destruction. You should have seen their faces. I could almost hear the grin over the phone. Still, a part of me tensed. Cornered animals can be dangerous. I double-checked my locks, made sure my security cameras were recording. These weren't masterminds, but desperation has a way of making fools bold. I wasn't about to give them another opening to make me a victim. 2 nights later, my neighbor texted me at midnight. You hear this? From my porch, I caught distant shouting carried on the cool night air. Somewhere near the junkyard, voices rose angry, frantic. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable, fury laced with panic. I smiled into the darkness, a quiet satisfaction humming through me like the purr my truck used to make before they gutted it. They were realizing the truth now, I thought. This wasn't just some prank pulled by their buddies. Their precious Crown Vic wasn't coming back, and the worst was still ahead of them. I woke the next morning to a sky, the color of cold steel, and a breeze that smelled faintly of rain, the kind of weather that makes you feel like something's about to break. My phone buzzed before I'd even finished my first sip of coffee. Jake's name lit the screen. His voice held that mix of amusement and warning that always meant trouble. You might want to hear what happened at the junkyard last night, he said. Your friends showed up. I leaned against the counter, mug in hand, heart picking up a steady rhythm. Showed up how? I asked, though a grin was already threatening. He cleared his throat dramatically. Tried to steal their own car back. One distracts the yard owner, the other slips around back with a spare key. Classic. If it weren't so pathetic, I nearly choked on my coffee. The mental picture of those 2 clowns tiptoeing around piles of rusted metal like cartoon burglars was almost too good, and I prompted, unable to hide the chuckle in my voice. The junkyard owner knew what was coming. Jake continued. We'd warned him. He cut the drive shaft clean off before they arrived. They could have shoved any key they wanted into the ignition. Car wasn't going anywhere. The thought of their faces when they turned that useless key warmed me from the inside out. Jake's voice grew sharper though. They didn't take it well. Cops were already on site. Caught them red-handed. Arrested for attempted theft. I felt the satisfaction wash over me slow and deep, like a tide finally reaching shore. They had stolen from me, mocked me, and now here they were, cuffed and humiliated among mountains of scrap. But something inside me still burned. Maybe it was all the sleepless nights. Maybe just the principle of it, but I wasn't done. Revenge wasn't just about winning. It was about making sure the lessons stuck. They'll get out, I said, half to myself. They'll be back on the street before the weekend. Jake let out a knowing sigh. Yeah, but trust me, this has already cost them more than they can afford. Still, the ember of irritation glowed. I remembered my truck's gutted undercarriage. The jolt in my chest when I turned that key and heard nothing but raw, broken noise. The memory scratched at me like sandpaper. I wanted the satisfaction of knowing they'd never crawl back under someone else's truck with a saw again. I wanted permanence. That evening, I drove by the trailer park where they lived. I told myself it was curiosity, but I knew better. Their battered trailer sat at the edge of the lot, paint peeling in long white strips. The yard littered with beer cans and forgotten junk, and there, parked crooked in the driveway, sat a beater Jeep Liberty. No plates, tires worn to the cord. I pulled over far enough not to be noticed and watched. The Jeep leaned to one side as though it had given up on the idea of roadworthiness long ago. My lips curved into a slow, involuntary smile. It was like they'd written me an invitation in grease and rust. Come and get it, when I called Jake later. He didn't even wait for me to explain. "Let me guess," he said dryly. "They bought another heap without paperwork." I described the Jeep in detail, and he chuckled. "Low and dangerous. Some people never learn. You know the drill. If you see it on a public street, call me. We'll handle it exactly like last time." For the next few days, I became a silent shadow. I drove the side streets near the trailer park, waiting for my chance. Every time I spotted the Jeep parked on private property, I forced myself to keep driving, the anticipation tightening in my chest like a drawn bowstring. My truck's engine, now repaired and humming like new, seemed to share my hunger for closure. Meanwhile, whispers drifted through town. Folks at the hardware store and the coffee shop spoke of the two punks who'd been arrested trying to steal back their own stolen car. Stories grew in the telling. Some claimed they'd been caught in a wild chase through the junkyard. Others said they'd tried to bribe the cops. The truth didn't matter. Their reputations were in tatters, and I savored every rumor like a slow sip of bourbon. Then, one gray afternoon, I spotted the Jeep easing out of the trailer park. The driver hunched low, as if trying to disappear behind the cracked windshield. My pulse quickened. This was it, the moment when preparation met opportunity. I trailed them from a distance, careful not to draw attention. They rolled through a stop sign like it didn't exist and turned onto a quiet residential street, the kind lined with tidy lawns and mailboxes waiting for the evening delivery. I parked half a block behind and dialed. "Jake, it's out," I said, keeping my voice low. "Public street, no plates," he answered without hesitation. "Stay put. I'll make the call." The wait was electric. Minutes crawled by as the Jeep idled at the curb, one of the kids leaning out the window to spit onto the pavement. I imagined their minds, still spinning from the loss of the Crown Vic, still too arrogant to see the trap closing in again. When the tow truck arrived, its amber lights flashing in the pale afternoon, I felt the same rush I'd experienced the first time, only stronger. The Jeep's driver turned just in time to see the truck back up, chains clinking like iron laughter. His eyes went wide, his mouth falling open, as if the universe itself had betrayed him. He scrambled out, waving his arms, words tumbling out in frantic, half-formed protests. The tow driver barely spared him a glance, methodically hooking the Jeep as if swatting at a fly. "No plates, no insurance," the driver said flatly. "City ordinance. Nothing I can do." The other kid appeared from the trailer park entrance, running full tilt, face flushed with disbelief. I sat low in my seat, hidden by tinted glass, heart thudding in delicious rhythm as the second chapter of their downfall unfolded before me. The Jeep lifted slowly, its rear tires leaving the ground like a defeated animal dragged to the slaughter. Their shouts carried down the street, anger, panic, desperation, all twisted together. One of them kicked at the curb, the hollow thud echoing like a drumbeat of frustration. The tow truck driver tightened the last chain and pulled away, the Jeep dangling helplessly behind. The kids stood there in stunned silence, small against the fading afternoon light. I didn't need to hear what came next. I knew the process by now. The police would run the Ving, find years of unpaid fees or a missing title, and the Jeep would follow the Crown Vic into oblivion. I eased away from the curb, a quiet smile playing across my lips, as I drove home. The weight I'd carried for weeks finally began to lift. It wasn't just about stolen metal anymore. It was about taking back power from those who thought they could bully the world and never face consequences. Justice hadn't come from a courtroom or a badge. It had come from patience, cunning, and the simple decision to fight back on my own terms. Still, as the sun dipped low and the first drops of rain streaked across my windshield, I felt a strange calm settle in. This wasn't rage anymore, it was resolution. They had written the story themselves, and I had simply turned the final page. The lesson would linger, etched in every crushed frame and every rumor whispered in the town long after the sound of their cheap bass faded into memory. The rain that evening turned the streets into mirrors of wavering neon. Each splash beneath my tires seemed to echo the rhythm of a story, finally reaching its ending. I parked beneath the awning of my own driveway and let the engine idle for a moment, listening to the smooth, steady purr of my newly repaired truck. The sound was a bombful, rich, no longer ripped open by thieves' saws. For the first time in weeks, the knot of tension in my chest began to loosen. Word of the second tow spread through town even faster than the first. At the coffee shop the next morning, heads leaned together over steaming mugs, the air thick with whispers. "Did you hear?" someone muttered. "They lost another car. This time, a Jeep." A low ripple of laughter followed. No one said my name, but a few knowing glances slid in my direction, their meaning unmistakable. I just sipped my coffee and let the warmth soak in. Jake stopped by my workshop later that afternoon, leaning against the doorframe with the casual confidence of a man who knows he's helped tie up a perfect knot. "Police ran the VIN," he said, grinning. "Same story. Years of unpaid registration. Owner on record, hasn't lived here in a decade. That Jeep's headed for a black title, just like the Crown Vic. Junkyard already cleared space." He tipped an imaginary hat. 2 for 2. I let out a slow breath that came out as a half laugh. "You ever think about how poetic this is?" I asked. "They took something valuable from me, something functional, and now everything they touch turns worthless." Jake's grin widened. "Karma's got a sense of humor, man. You just helped it along." Still, beneath the satisfaction, a quiet part of me wondered if they would ever understand the lesson. I pictured them waking each morning to the sight of their driveway growing emptier by the day, the sting of their own arrogance settling deeper. I hoped the message wasn't just about losing cause, it was about realizing that the world eventually pushes back when you push it too far. 2 evenings later, I drove past the trailer park again, my truck's engine humming low and steady. Their porch light burned weakly against the darkness. No music rattled the thin aluminum walls. No voices spilled into the night. The place looked like it was holding its breath. Through the streaks of rain on my windshield, I could just make out their silhouettes inside too, shadows pacing without purpose. For a moment I almost felt a pang of pity, almost. But then the memory of that gutted undercarriage flashed before my eyes, mocking laughter captured by Mrs. Keegan's camera. The careless confidence that they'd get away with it. Whatever sympathy I might have felt drained away like water down a storm grate. The junkyard called Jake the next day to share the final scene. The two thieves had shown up again, this time only to watch. The Jeep, like the Crown Vic before it, was hoisted by the crane and dropped into the maw of the shredder. Steel screamed as the machine chewed through doors and axles. One of the kids shouted something, angry, broken sound, and then turned away. The other simply stared, motionless, as their second car became nothing but twisted fragments. I pictured the shredder's grinding roar, the shower of sparks as steel met steel. In my mind it was the sound of justice, a noise far more satisfying than any court verdict could ever be. That image stayed with me long after the call ended. A towering machine tearing their pride to pieces while they stood powerless, forced to watch. The following week the town settled back into its usual rhythm. But the story lived on, at the gas station, at the diner, even at the hardware store where I bought new tools. People recounted the tale of the two would-be thieves who lost not one but 2 cars to their own stupidity. Some embellished the details, claims of high-speed chases or dramatic standoffs, but the core truth remained. Crime had met consequences, swift and certain. My truck, newly fitted with a pair of fresh catalytic converters, purred better than it had in years. Every time I turned the key and heard that deep, even rumble, a quiet pride filled me. It wasn't just about a repair. It was about reclaiming something larger, my sense of control, my belief that you don't have to stay powerless when someone wrongs you. One quiet Sunday afternoon, I found myself back on the porch, coffee cup warming my palms as a soft breeze rustled the trees. I thought about how easily this story could have been different, how quickly anger can drive a man to reckless choices. But patience, careful planning, and a little help from a friend had delivered a justice both legal and unforgettable. As twilight settled, the first stars blinking awake in the dusky sky, I reflected on what the past weeks had taught me. Revenge isn't always about shouting the loudest or striking the hardest. Sometimes it's about patience, about letting the guilty write their own downfall, while you simply guide the pen. I knew those two punks would think twice before crawling beneath another truck with a saw. And if they didn't, well, the city had plenty more tow trucks, and I had plenty more coffee to sip while the wheels of karma kept turning. That night I slept with the windows open. The rain had passed, leaving the air cool and clean. My truck rested in the driveway, solid and whole. Somewhere across town, 2 would-be thieves sat in silence, their pride shredded alongside the last remnants of their stolen joy. And for the first time since that awful morning, I felt the kind of peace that comes only when unshakable justice has finally been served. Some people believe revenge is a dark road, but I've learned it doesn't have to be. Justice can be precise, patient, and even poetic. Those boys stole more than just metal. They tried to steal my sense of security. What they didn't know was that every act of arrogance plants the seed of its own downfall. All it took was time and the quiet confidence to let that seed grow. If you enjoyed this story of patience and payback, hit that like button and subscribe for more true tales of justice served cold. And remember, sometimes the sweetest revenge isn't loud or violent. It's watching karma do exactly what it was always meant to do.